El Loco, also widely known as Colombia's very own Pablo Escobar, was a legend in the criminal world, being the leader of one of the most successful and established drug empires known to man. Daniel Barrera's life story is one for the history books. Notorious for being the country's most dangerous and renowned kingpin, Barrera was a trailblazer in the Colombian drug trade due to his aptitude for violence and his ruthless and cunning tactics. Despite his reputation now, Barrera started from humble beginnings. Born in 1966 in a small town in Colombia, Daniel Barrera grew up facing extreme poverty and hardship. Although he faced obstacle after obstacle in his youth, it was apparent to those around him that his ambitious nature and quick wits would lead him to make a name for himself someday. What many didn't expect, however, was that it would be in the world of drugs. His career in illegal activities really took off in the 1980s. Under the advisory of his brother, Omar Barrera, they had started with an operation in their home state of 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤, where they had a team of chemical precursors in laboratories turning coca bases into cocaine hydrochloride. Before that, he had just been committing low-tier crimes like petty theft and robberies. The two were close, both in terms of brothership and companionship, and worked alongside each other to build their business from the ground up. That's why it was such a devastating blow to Daniel when Omar was assassinated later in the 80s. So much so that Daniel sought revenge against his brother's killer, and his deadly act of retribution earned him the title of El Loco, which translates to madman. He was so mad that once he even eradicated all of his fingerprints in acid. By the 1990s, Colombia's drug trade was at the peak of its success. With millions and millions of dollars circulating throughout the industry, it seemed to many that it was a surefire way to make a fortune. Barrera, having recently escaped from prison after being arrested for drug trafficking, was quick to get back on his feet and back into the game. One of Barrera's most effective strategies was in regards to knowing and appealing to the right people. It was said that he had bribed countless Colombian police officers to maintain his empire, with many of his business partners being members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC. He established himself as a reliable middleman and trafficker in the mid-1990s, purchasing and successfully selling cocaine from notable sources, such as the FARC 10th, 14th, 16th, and 17th fronts. He would sell coca base to the rebels' paramilitary rivals, as well as process coca himself to ready them for sale in the international market. The cocaine powder would be processed in his laboratories and then shipped and transported to locations in 4 different continents, including the United States. In a short time, with his intellect, charm, and fresh perspective in this growing market, he had been able to curate a powerful clientele and was making all the right moves in the criminal underworld. It wasn't long before he knew that he wanted more than to be just a player in the game. He wanted to dominate it. In 2004, Barrera partnered with Manuel de Jesus Piraban, alias Jorge Pirata, and Pedro Olivero Guerrero, alias 𝐥𝐤𝐤, on a series of organized attacks on rivals in the Centauros bloc, as well as enemies in the Eastern Plains. These actions caused many of them to back off Barrera's operations out of fear, allowing him to expand with little to no resistance. In 2008, Barrera had managed to grow his business significantly, and had joined forces with the likes of Luis Enrique Serna, aka 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, and Diego Perez Henao, aka Diego Rastrojo, to orchestrate the assassination of Wilber Varela, aka 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐿 Soap. 𝐿 was a prominent leader of the Norte de Valle cartel in Venezuela, and his execution provided Barrera with even more power and leeway to take over as a major player in the drug trade. Soon after, he purchased smuggling routes in the northern province of Atlántico, further expanding his operations into other geographic areas. He secured the loyalty of several local security officials, establishing even further control over product coming in and out of Colombia. He had access and, at times, even command over several trafficking routes from the Venezuelan plains to the Caribbean coast to Brazil. Barrera was a master of the drug trade, and the money that he made off of sales was reinvested into his business to buy off politicians and law enforcement officials, as well as pay monthly taxes to the AUC to allow for the safe movement of his product in and out of Colombia, making him nearly untouchable. He then ventured into illegal arms trading and money laundering, which only helped to grow his already expansive criminal network further. His intricate schemes and his willingness to go to the furthest lengths to eradicate his enemies made him an unstoppable force. Each month, Barrera and his organization processed about 5,000 kilograms of raw cocaine base into cocaine powder. But the streets talked, and word of his actions was spreading like wildfire. With Barrera's empire growing stronger by the day, other drug lords began to see him as a threat. Organizations in the Eastern Plains began to curate plans to take him down in hopes of eliminating him as a competitor. Victor Carranza, a well-known drug trafficker and paramilitary leader, was among the first to attempt an ambush. Both times he was unsuccessful in capturing and killing Barrera, and all that came from it was bad blood and a heated feud. Despite quickly rising in the ranks of the criminal underworld, Barrera was still a relatively new player compared to some of the others in the industry. His entry into the drug world brought new ideologies and strategies, which many of his colleagues weren't thrilled about. It seemed as though Barrera was one to sweet-talk his way into temporary, tenuous alliances to get his way, and his loyalty was seemingly questionable at best. Not to mention, his reputation preceded him, and his high profile made him an easy target. Barrera knew that a war with 𝐦𝐤𝐳𝐬, one of the most established and respected figures in the Colombian market, was likely to end badly for him. There was already an increased military presence in the Eastern Plains where he conducted most of his business, and he knew that this was only the start. To protect himself, he decided to break off his longtime partnership with the 𝐸 and turn them into authorities. Around this time, the U.S. Southern District Court of Florida established a new team of prosecutors whose sole goal was to take down the up-and-coming Colombian drug gangs. With Barrera having made such a name for himself, it came as no surprise that he was one of the first to be issued a U.S. indictment. Colombian security forces assisted in the quest to take Barrera's empire down through a series of operations that directly targeted his drug rings. Many arrests were made and assets were seized, and it seemed as though the result of all his hard work was crumbling before his very eyes. During one of the operations against his cartel, authorities seized 21 airplanes that were used to transport cocaine. Not only that, but Barrera was also losing some of his essential connections and contacts. In 2010, Emerald trader Julio Alberto Lozano, aka Lucho, turned himself in to the Colombian police and promised his cooperation and information in exchange for a more favorable sentence. He was quick to rat out on the El Dorado cartel, a network of renowned drug traffickers that Barrera was a part of. It didn't take long before members of the El Dorado cartel started facing arrests. In February 2012, one of Barrera's key partners, Heriberto Fernandez Ramírez, aka Beto, was facing serious time. He is said to have been the main tie between Barrera's Colombian operations and the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. Still, Barrera was determined to make the most of his circumstances and always remained 2 steps ahead. He strengthened relationships with contacts in Colombian security forces, who gave him the right information to continue optimizing his business and mobilizing his forces against possible threats. He also established contacts in the Colombian intelligence services by cooperating with them to take down 2 top traffickers, which resulted in his benefit, as he was able to take over their operations and routes. Barrera's organization primarily operated in the Eastern Plains, in provinces such as Meta, Vichada, Casanare, and Guaviare. He also had control over some parts of Colombia's capital, Bogota, and conducted frequent business in the Apure state of Venezuela. Barrera himself remained mainly in the Vichada province in Colombia, and sometimes part of Venezuela, where he had the most support and protection from local authorities. However, despite all his efforts to adapt and stay ahead of the curve, he was eventually captured in San Cristobal, Venezuela, on September 18, 2012. Barrera was staying at a safe house in the city when the Venezuelan and Colombian police surrounded him. He was taken into custody without resistance and was transported back to Colombia, where he was issued several criminal charges, including drug trafficking, illegal arms trading, and money laundering. Also, Venezuelan officials confiscated houses, ranches, a yacht, apartments, and 48 cars from Barrera. The New York Times had said that this arrest was the outcome of a 4-nation endeavor. The operation first commenced in 2010 after the Colombian police had received a tip about Barrera's activities and whereabouts, and incarcerating him was a highly coordinated effort between Colombian, Venezuelan, UK, and US authorities. The United States extradited Barrera from Colombia to the Southern District of New York on July 9, 2013, to be sentenced in an American court of law. On July 10, 2013, 3 US attorneys announced his charges, which included conspiring to distribute and manufacture cocaine, knowing it would be unlawfully imported into the United States, conspiring to import cocaine into the United States, and conspiracy to launder money. These 3 counts gave Barrera a maximum sentence of life in prison and a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. He pleaded guilty to the money laundering charges but denied the rest. On November 20, 2014, Barrera ended up pleading guilty in the Southern District of New York to conspiring to distribute and manufacture over 400 tons of cocaine, knowing that it will be imported into the United States. Throughout his career, it was said that he had processed approximately 60,000 kilograms of cocaine annually and over 720,000 kilograms during his entire course of the conspiracy. In 2016, Barrera was sentenced in Manhattan Federal Court to 35 years in prison by District Judge Gregory H. Woods for his prominent role in conspiring to distribute and manufacture cocaine, knowing that it would be imported to the United States. He was also ordered to forfeit $10 million. Daniel Barrera was a phenomenon amongst even the most notorious of drug lords. Even Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos had said that Barrera was the last of the great kingpins, which shows just how influential and powerful El Loco was in narcotics. Being one of the most wanted men in the entire world, it comes as no surprise that his arrest made headlines. His astuteness, business acumen, and ability to always have the right allies at the right time propelled him and his empire to the top. Although he may have taken quite a fall from grace, it's undeniable that his life story will be told for generations to come, as he completely revolutionized the Colombian drug game.